Hello, welcome to the AI Lead Show. This is your host, Dr. Brian Lambert. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about scaling AI adoption, bridging the gap between tech and business. You know, the key challenge with AI today is not just about AI readiness, it's actually about the overall organization's ability to adopt and trust new technologies. There's a significant trust gap. 62% of executives believe in AI, and 43% of the people involved with AI say that they're not exactly sure if they trust it. And that means that the organizations, the leaders in the middle of the organization are often trapped in ambiguity. So bringing back the panel today, we've got orchestrator, scaler, and integrator. Hey guys, how you doing? And we're gonna talk about the news. We're gonna talk about some news features. We're going to have your commentary on what's happening, and we're going to explore today why AI is sometimes feels a little bit stuck or a little bit of a black box in your organization. While AI holds great potential, the reality is that many enterprises are struggling to adopt. 80% of initiatives don't make it to production. There's a lot of piloting going on, but are we learning those lessons from the piloting? Half the organizations that I research cite difficulties improving the ROI and business value of AI. And there's a talent gap. I met with a company that does a lot of technology recruiting and placements. They're saying less than 10% of the people that they have in their database have the skills they need to work on AI native projects. And there is a huge skills gap in the AI software development area to use AI. And these statistics highlight a very real challenge that enterprise faces in turning AI aspirations and hype into tangible business impact. And this is going to play out for a while. So this year it's really critical to build some sort of foundation to build within and upon. So from a news perspective, it's really about a bit of a reality check here. 80% of initiatives don't make it. 49% are citing a difficulty in proving AI value. And then 12% of people have the skills to do it. And that's a real challenge for executives as they move into the idea of turning the promise of AI into reality. So let's talk a little bit about what might be holding this back. Well, a lot of companies are starting in the legal area. They're starting with, well, what can we legally do? How do we make sure that we do AI responsibly and ethically? And you know what? That's a good thing. That's a good thing. The regulatory landscape for AI is evolving. There are new compliance requirements. In California, there are laws that require transparency around the data used to train AI. The EU has introduced an AI pact, which outlines voluntary governance strategies. Consumers are looking at companies, not just sustainability reports or DEI reports. They're also looking at the ethical use of data and the use of data in their AI models. So organizations need to be proactive in understanding and aligning with the emerging regulations around AI to understand what sandbox they can play in, what the boundaries are. The key is for the organizations to carefully navigate this shifting regulatory environment. And within that regulatory environment, there are a lot of questions that managers have. And that's really the challenge of the middle of the organization, where the vision might be AI enabled, but from a risk perspective and a skills perspective and a process perspective, it's not quite clear how to move forward. And that's the news from the week, the concepts related to AI adoption and, more importantly, achieving AI at scale. So what do you guys think, panelists, with regard to the news this week?
I would like to, but I'm not really qualified to speak on the ROI problem. I think that number is probably pretty low. If 49% have trouble explaining it, I think it's got to be higher than that, because adoption in a lot of cases is so low. And a lot of that reason is that these systems are built in a closed environment to do one thing, and then we have trouble sticking them together into a coherent workflow, right? You don't want to add an additional tool under someone's belt. So that's one of the reasons why these things stall out. They get a lot of enthusiasm among early adopters, people who don't mind the messiness and the cutting and the pasting, but those types of integrations simply won't scale.
Well, we brought up the fact that there's still a lot of these applications that are in pilot mode, right? That they haven't really turned it on to working within the organization. So, and because it's still fairly new, I wonder if there hasn't been enough body of work yet done to say, hey, here's what average ROI is expected, heck, across the organization. I mean, within just a department using it. So I still think it's so new or in the infancy of it that there's just not enough data yet to guide people on, hey, here's the path to take.
So Brian, I'll jump in now. So it seems like to me that the adoption problem, what are they adopting, right? What's the perception of what they're adopting? Is it going to be, all right, I'm going to interact with Gemini now? Well, no, that's not what you're adopting. You're adopting something that's going to be far more holistic than that. And I wanted to start off my kind of commentary on this with one of the best terms that I heard years ago when it comes to adoption was a company who said, we want to create rolling thunder.
Ooh. What's that?
And cool term, right? Exactly. So everybody leaned forward. I said, so what is that? Well, it's not just a top-down thing. So we're going to let everybody know, let's take AI, that we're in for real. We're going to be doing this for the next several years. That was kind of point number one. But we want people in the field to be talking about it. That's the rolling thunder part, where one group says to another group, hey, have you looked at, this new agentic thing that we've done? And I say agentic because it's not just a agent, it's a combination of agents doing something that's for real. And then they tell another department, and then that next department says, hey, when do I get that? Right? It's that classic, how do you create a pull approach? So that was the term. That was a big tech firm that was going after an even bigger tech firm. So as part of that, they said, we got to have rolling thunder if we're going to beat, this $1 billion company. And so, I don't know, 6 months later, the people that were walking the hallways even had posters up about, what they were going to do. I thought that was cool. But how do you create that in a company, but you don't set the expectation that it's going to be like this? It's going to be, it's going to be this more holistic thing, and we're going to do it in increments.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we got our first comment in the chat from Jen Marie. Ooh, right out of the gate, the first 5 minutes. And you know what that means, everybody? 1 million points. 1 million points for Jen Marie. ROI might be difficult as the cost of running a prompt may outweigh the need to use AI. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think of that?
I'll jump in on that one because I'm working with a software company that's actually measuring ROI every time they run one of these agentic workflows. And it's interesting because it gives an estimate for hours saved against tokens used. So you can see pretty much in real time as to whether or not this agent is any good. Don't be ashamed that it's not. Just, understand it up front. And the reason this company's building that because they feel there's just too much hype around AI. So you've got to say right up front, what's the value to me, time saved, and what's the value to the company? And then in turn, what did it just cost us?
And then there's the adoption side, because, my role is helping teams, feel confident about using these tools. And, they need to have a safe environment to use it in. It's got to be practical. It has to be, hey, how's this going to help with my workflow? Am I allowed to use it? Right. And I think they need to feel like they can make mistakes too. And I don't know what we're seeing in terms of overall adoption, because I think, once people say, hey, I can really use this, as you were saying earlier, orchestrator, where then you have the next department saying, well, geez, how come I can't get that? And, normally I think it starts with, well, I guess it depends on your industry and your business, whether it starts with sales or whether it starts with ops or whether it starts with marketing, but it's about having a safe space to use it, play with it, and make mistakes.
Yeah, companies are definitely on the spectrum there. There's the companies that are saying, look, we have a enterprise-wide license to Copilot, and that's our AI, and that's what you're using. If you don't use it, you're not allowed to use anything else other than Copilot. And so I've talked to people in those kind of companies, and Copilot is running towards this idea that there'll be a dashboard of agents, and you can build these custom things that'll go off and do things for you. And you know what that means? Access to SharePoint and things like that. So they're definitely moving in that direction. On the flip side, I've also talked to a company that is all about democratizing AI, and it has flat out said to their employees, if in the next 6 months, if you're not doing things with AI that we can see, you may not work here anymore. And their idea of driving action around AI is, as long as OPSEC approves it, you can do it, and it doesn't matter. In fact, you better be doing it. And so every employee is encouraged to do something, whether it's building a chat bot, deploying AI in their content, and they're giving their whole company the tools to do it. And they're running AI hackathons to figure it out. And the only requirement is to get whatever you want to do approved by OPSEC, and make sure that we have, inside of our company, the security around the outer guardrails. So that means they're deploying their LLMs internally. That means they're building out apps internally. They actually had a training event where salespeople were using AI tools to build React web pages using Cursor AI. And so salespeople became quote unquote coders overnight. And they're encouraging that. So you have this big spectrum of looking at AI as a tool and a resource and an enabler versus something to be, protected, guardrailed, make sure that it's not, blowing up the company, so to speak. So there's a continuum there that I think impacts the idea of how do we achieve something at scale. And that really is a dilemma for people, because when you think about scaling, what does that even mean, right? So to an executive, the idea of scaling means, something like, well, we're able to say the word AI on earnings calls, like we've scaled it. To somebody in technology, it might be that I used AI when I coded, or it might mean that I'm actually building APIs to talk to external sources, therefore I've scaled it. I think this scaling word is a real interesting word. It means so many different things to different people. A study by Asana and Anthropic talked about the initial skepticism that people have, and really the idea that becoming mature in AI is quite far off. This is going to take a while. Less than 3% of companies, they consider themselves mature in AI. There's a lot of room to grow with this. And that means employee training and literacy, but who's going to provide that? Who's going to provide it? And it's interesting, most of the people that I talk to in this space of training and literacy through the Digital Command Initiative simply say they don't have time or permission to go learn this AI stuff. So they don't have time, they don't have permission. Nobody's asked them to go do it. And you know what? They're not going to spend their own free time, nights and weekends, unless the company's paying for it.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Because again, if a new application comes out, a new piece of software, departmentally, it's like, hey, we're going to train you on how to use this, and this is how this application works. This is how it's going to work in your workflows. But AI comes out, and they are, they're not investing it, and then how can they expect their employees, right, to want to use it beyond the pilot stage and feel comfortable with it if they're not going to train them on it? And again, they don't need, as you said earlier, they don't need a master's in how to build an agent. They just need to learn basic, simple basic. Hey, here's how prompting works. Here's how you refine your prompts. Here's how you evaluate what comes out. Real simple pieces of work that that help people out.
Yeah, and if it's also a good point from our chat. Thanks, Jen Marie. Now with 2 million points for Jen Marie. But yeah, who's watching the meter on all this stuff? If you have an democratized AI approach, who's watching the token usage, and this can get pretty expensive pretty fast when your employees are hitting all these models. Somebody's got to pay that utility fee, and then what's the ROI of that? And that's an interesting one because the upside on something like that what is the upside from a CFO's perspective who has to approve that budget of these investments in AI tokens versus hiring somebody? Is somebody having this conversation that we want more tokens versus more people, right? What is that what scaling means, right? What do you think, orchestrator?
I'm looking back at that point about AI as a service being costly, and I'm having flashbacks to the early days of SaaS where we thought, all right, SaaS is going to be cheaper. Well, it turned out, you have 15 different SaaS things running on the top of your desktop of sales or marketing, and it's not cheaper. So I do think that that's a great point right there, that, it seems like it's going to be cheaper, but is it? And so I do think that with companies that, do their homework, and let's say they do the foundational AI around things they can do internal to their company. There's a lot you can do riding on top of the LLM. Look at the LLM is 90% of the way there. You've got this basic genius on any topic. And every time I get a new client, I get a chance to learn the new discipline. So last week I learned HVAC construction. I didn't know anything about it. So now I know much more because AI taught me that, and the LLM was already in place. I just needed to harness its power. This week I'm working with investment banking, and with each one of these, it's been interesting because as you're working on the project, you're learning yourself. So there are things you can do internal. You don't have to outsource the whole thing. And that's what SaaS became, right? You had a SaaS product for every role. And oh, by the way, you'll have 10 for a particular role. And you guys remember seeing that, right? Where SaaS was supposed to be cheaper, but it ended up being actually quite costly.
And same thing with cloud. You're going to shift all your workloads to the cloud. It's going to be a lot cheaper with economies of scale. And perhaps it was for a while until now everybody has to run their compute, their LLM and their AI compute through the cloud. And it's the CPU cycles versus the storage challenge. And I think storage is cheap, so it's cheap to be in the cloud until you have to run everything to crunch all of these numbers and generate all these outputs. That's why OpenAI has placed an order for 100,000 new CPUs last week. 100,000 CPUs, GPUs, LPUs, NPUs, whatever you want to call it, for running these models. So they're massively expensive. Data centers are popping up to run the compute side in the cloud, and that's a completely different cost structure than a storage model in the cloud, right? Or services in the cloud. So compute is the challenge for a lot of companies right now. And these platform LLMs, these platform models like Anthropic and OpenAI and Grok, and they're eating a lot of that cost, but they want to recoup it, right? They're going to charge for the utility usage. And just like electricity or internet access or water or waste management at your house, they're going to keep raising the rates of using these models. So you have to be intentional about the use case and the return on investment in the name of scaling. Right. Again, we're going back to this idea that adoption of AI is an organizational challenge. And an organizational challenge, you have the growth side, you have the bean counting side, the financial discussion, you have the tech discussion, you have the human discussion of the people, the HR, you have the supply chain discussion, you have the ability with your vendors and partnering in the ecosystem discussion. That's what it means to think about scaling from an AI perspective. And these things are a lot to figure out. And I think that's where a lot of people are in the space of, it's not my decision, it's above my pay grade. And that's a bit of the challenge that you have to overcome, this this middle zone where executives want to think big and ask questions like, where's my chat bot at scale, and how many calls can we run through this, versus the tech implementation of how do we build it without the wheels coming off, or how do we prioritize? That's the big one from a tech perspective. Are we supposed to prioritize this AI stuff in front of the 20 years of workload we have to do of all these tickets? Who's prioritizing? And then where's the investment coming from? And in a middle zone where the management teams are, where the cross-departmental conversation needs to happen, this idea of collaboration, again, under the auspices of let's achieve scale, it means that you're cross-functional. And that's the challenge and the dilemma, but it's also the opportunity, right? So let's talk about the opportunity here in that by thinking through a couple of things. One, how do we break through this challenge and come out with an opportunity that we can all get behind, a pilot we can all get behind, an impact that we can all believe in and do the right and have the confidence that we're doing the right thing. And then also, how do we put it into action and enroll people in the change? One of the concepts in the AI lead book that I talk about is this concept of a speed layer, where the speed layer helps you to have fast decisions, build cross-functional alignment, and also provides the operational glue in order to make it happen. So I thought it'd be helpful for us to dive into a bit of the speed layer as a way to talk through these AI initiatives. So from a tech perspective, there are a lot of technologies in a canvas like this. On the far left side, you've got data producers. A data producer can be anybody or any machine that's producing some sort of data stream or data output. It's where the bits and the bytes are generated. On the right side, you have somebody who wants to put it into action, like a CEO or a marketer or a salesperson. And we hear about data as the new oil, and we hear about the concept of how do we turn data into insight, or perhaps how do we use AI to generate the right type of momentum or insight. Well, the stuff in the middle is where the rubber meets the road. How do you ingest the data? How do you store and enrich the data? Where do you publish the information and generate the experience and generate the insights and generate the outputs with generative AI? So on the left side, you have more of a machine learning focus. On the right side, you have more of a generative AI focus in this middle layer. But it all has to work within the context of your enterprise architecture at some point if you're talking about at scale. So what we are spending a lot of time with in my clients is to talk about the idea that you really need to pilot, and not just pilot the initiative, but pilot a speed layer outside the fabric of the existing organization's infrastructure. You have to pursue parallel paths. And that's the key here, because if you try to deploy AI at scale and you don't think through what's our data governance, what's our architecture governance, how do we deploy from a DevOps perspective, what cloud, how do we manage the financial impact of the cloud as we're producing outputs, it becomes unwieldy. So let's use the speed layer to talk through some examples. And, Orchestrator's got examples from your clients with HVAC and financial services. I know Integrator, you've got experiences in being an early adopter inside of organizations to bring out, generative AI. Scalar, you've got examples of helping people with customer service chatbots. Let's use the speed layer here as a concept and tell some stories. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Let's do it. Who wants to go first?
I guess I will.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
The incident I'm thinking about, and the names will be changed to protect the innocent and the guilty, was a really good example of developing the engine and the model first, and then going right into user acceptance testing, right? So what we had was something that tested very well. The model did what it was supposed to do. It gave us the information and the analysis that we wanted to, but it did this through a web interface that someone had to open up in a tab. And we thought we were done. we thought we were done with this and say, okay, great. Well, the whole world can go in there and they can ask it questions and do the thing. What we hadn't really considered was that actually extends their workflow. That makes their workflow a little bit longer, a little bit more difficult. The integrations have to be built so that it shows up right in front of their eyes without them having to do anything. Those integrations should be built before the model gets tested, right? But it never happens that way. People are testing the model to see what's possible, and they go from a prototype. Once that prototype's working, they go too quickly into user acceptance testing and slowing it out there. And so the initial results you get as far as ROI are abysmal, because it's actually taking these people, these early adopters, a little bit more time to do the tasks, a little bit more effort, a little bit more task switching for them, because the integrations hadn't been ironed out beforehand. And we had some murky communication of the business value. So
in that case,
connection is hard.
The concept worked in that case, but then they went to quote unquote scale to the masses too fast. Is that what happened?
Essentially, yeah. We opened it up a little bit too quickly before it was scaled properly.
Yeah. So it's like jumping to scale without thinking about the steps between a proof of concept and deploying it to everybody. And it got overcome by it sounds like a lot of different factors led to its either lack of implementation and scaling, or perhaps diverting it to something else, or just shutting it down. Maybe it didn't even get off the ground.
Yeah, Brian, to jump in on that term, proof of concept, I really like that as opposed to a prototype, right? Perception being what it is, prototypes are thrown away. Proof of concept is this is our first deployment. And once we prove the concept and somebody says, you know what, I'd use that, and another department says the same thing, then you got that rolling thunder. I really like this discovery box you have here, because the work that we've been doing thus far, it's a test. Let's say that you want to do company valuations, which has always been this kind of gray thing, right? Determining the value of a company. And is it just the market cap if it's a public company? Is it just the IP if it's a private company, whatever it might be? But there's a whole array of values. You could actually build an agentic workflow to discover that. But you have to go through the process with AI to understand where it's good, where it's really not at all, and then where it's great. And so that discovery box right now, I think, is a really big deal, because we're all beginning to discover, to use the same term, what these LLMs are capable of. So,
Yeah.
What if you did a proof of concept in which you saved somebody who's doing valuations, 60 to 70% of the manual effort? They go to Crunchbase, they go to Yahoo, they go to, the company's income statement, whatever. But what if it automated that part? It fed back the results of that part, and at the end told you the subtle nuances of that company. That, by the way, is an example. It came back with some nuances, and I'm thinking, well, I didn't even think about those. I was back to the equation that I understood that I was supposed to use and automated that. It came back and said, but what if? And oh, by the way, if you don't have a deal maker in the middle of this, that's understanding the politics and the people. So I do think that it's all about discovery right now. But then once you really find something where somebody says, you know what, can you now integrate that to the systems I already use? So make it a headless application, as they're now saying, right? It just autonomously runs. So I think if you do POCs with the idea that you're going to discover things, I'm already finding this out on a discipline that you may or may not know, and then everybody lines up and says, yep, I'd use that. Then I think it's ready to scale.
Yeah, the idea of that is really important. What are we actually trying to achieve in the discovery piece here? And then what is the role of generative AI in helping? Is it from a productivity perspective, from a cost, operational effectiveness perspective, et cetera? And when you think about, let's just say in my customer service example, the idea that there is a lot of knowledge codified in a lot of different data sources. So data has been produced information has been produced on the far left side of this speed layer. So there's a lot of PDFs, a lot of presentations, a lot of frequently asked questions documents, a lot of help desk articles. That data has been produced. And let's say we want to use it in generative AI. And somebody has the idea of, hey, we're sitting on a gold mine of all of these assets we've built over many years about our technology and our platform. I wonder if we can do anything with that. So we've got all this data and information produced. Well, what's the enterprise outcome and the ROI expectation of using all that information? Do we even know? Then from a piloting perspective, how would we orchestrate that? When we orchestrate that, what would we help people discover with it? What questions could they ask? What questions could they retrieve? What information would be helpful? What use case or what users are we impacting? And without those questions asked in a simple customer service scenario here or use case, then we're not going to get to a technical answer, because the technology team, if we try to bridge the gap to the tech team, the first thing they're going to say is, well, what's the requirements? And if our requirements are, I don't know, we got a bunch of PDFs laying around, let's just put them out there. That's going to shoot you in the foot from an AI perspective. And we've already seen that happen over and over again. You can't just ingest, store and enrich, publish, and have a great experience. There's a lot of architecture and technology questions to be answered to turn that raw customer service data and information, even if people put a lot of work into it, to make it AI ready to have a great customer experience on the right side of this. And even if you're just taking one PDF only, let's just use that. Let's try to go really, really micro. How would you take one PDF in the enterprise and let customers ask questions about one PDF? Could you even pull that off in a chatbot, for example, which is the most basic use case of AI today? Not machine learning, which would be on the left side. Machine learning can do a lot of stuff behind the scenes with a lot of calculations, whatever. I'm talking about generative AI on one PDF. How would you, quote unquote, scale that? Because when you go to 10 PDFs or 1,000 PDFs or 10,000 PDFs, you're in a whole different realm from a technology perspective. So again, another great comment, from Jen Marie, AI strategy is needed to achieve competitive advantage within the speed layer. Operational efficiency is not sufficient to stay competitive. And I agree with that totally. So that's a walkthrough from a customer service perspective of how do you think through the outcomes expected of AI-ifying something, orchestrating that, figuring out what we would even do with it, and then turning the knowledge and the information into action or experience. So hopefully that helps with an example. I don't know, team, do you have any other comments you want to share with the speed layer?
While we have the graphic up here, I'm working mainly right now, Brian, with SMBs that they would like to think they had something like this being worked up for them, but they just don't have the wherewithal to pull this off. And the challenge there is that now with the LLMs being public, been around for 10 years, right? But now they're the general public, they're usable, and there's tools to interact with them. Can't they get the same level of enterprise outcomes as these big companies? And this isn't leading into why you need a consultant. This is more leading into how do they get there if they don't have somebody that's representing them? Big billion-dollar companies, this graphic here, they're already all in. They're already down this road. They've already educated a team within IT to do this. And now the question is, are they connecting the dots with discovery and people out in the field? But how about the SMBs? How would they pull this off?
I think they'd be able to adopt it a heck of a lot easier. So if you've got a smaller organization with smaller departments that are more closely aligned, right?
Yep.
Instead of large organizations with, entrenched, separate, siloed departments, I think it would be from, common sense. It'd be much simpler for a smaller organization to be able to reach scale simply due to the size and the intimacy of the organization. If I'm looking at this as a large organization, I'm just thinking about, wow, there's a lot of mobilization, a lot of resources that have to happen, a lot of connections to make this work to scale.
Yeah, and SMBs is a great one. So if you think of like 30 people,
Yeah.
And they all have multiple hats. What if they could hire a virtual bot that could help them? What would they have them help do? What would that bot help them do? And there's a lot of proprietary knowledge laying around that's not in a great formatted structure, but AI can handle a lot, and a lot of unstructured data that's messy. The key is when you ingest it, you understand what happens when it's ingested. Technically, you could just throw it all into the database and all the magic would happen. But you might find that the precision that you're looking for in your answers from your virtual teammate, your bot, may not mirror your deep expertise as a small business owner or somebody who's been expert in the field for 20 years. On the flip side, AI has the ability to cover a lot of gaps because of its generative capabilities. It can do things that humans that can't, that don't have the training, because it has the training. And so it can do things like, give you an opinion on what to do next or how to go about a problem, or to maybe even share a perspective or even a technical detail because you're not a technologist. Well, your virtual teammate could be.
It makes me think, Brian. So let's say you're talking about a medium-sized wealth management firm, right? Maybe 20, 25 employees. And you've got people that sell insurance, that do estate planning, that do financial planning broadly, that work on investments. But none of those people are tech people, are they? I highly doubt it. And so, again, can they leverage AI to do that technological thinking for them, to kind of take that speed layer model and say, hey, here's how this works. And here's how that you can basically, in this small organization that's really dependent upon data, right? If you think about it, this is how you would do it. So.
Yeah, I love this point about preconditioning that data, so you don't just drop in all your PDFs and your PowerPoints and so on. But the one thing for sure with AI is it sure makes it easier, Brian. And I know you've been doing a little bit of this as well, right? Even if you don't get it right, it'll actually help you get it right. And you don't even have to know what a vector database is.
Right.
You're still struggling to wonder why they keep calling it ingesting versus loading. That's fine. All these new terms. It's the same damn thing. But what's interesting is that, preconditioning it and so on, some of these models will actually do that too. So do you know relational database technology? Oh, you don't? No worries. Did you have to sit down with your last repository and define a taxonomy? We don't this time. Hold on. No, you got to have a data set. So there are some things that'll trip you up along the way. But what I think what's really interesting about that graphic is that I agree 100%. Smaller companies don't have those departmental silos. So they could take an idea and run a proof of concept and have something done by this Friday. When I say this Friday, today, you could actually have something done today. And that agentic workflow I was working on earlier this week, I thought it was going to be 3 steps. It turned out to be 8. And the reason it was 8, there was 5 steps that AI said I had to do that I didn't know that I had to do, but it told me that I had to do them. It said I can't scan the whole internet for these companies.
Thank goodness for AI.
So, I should have known that, by the way.
Well, which AI were you using to lean on there? Which model?
So I use 3 different models right now: Claude, and I use Gemini, and I use ChatGPT. Those are the 3. But I'm also kind of playing a little bit with Grok. But I'm using a platform that allows me to go between them easily, Brian. So I don't have to figure out the nuances of each one of them, what they're good at. I'm using something that helps me understand what they're good at, which then, the myth part that you talked about in our prep call today, you don't have to pick a model,
right.
But you do have to understand how many tokens you're using across models, what you're spending.
Yeah.
But I think it's exciting times, but these SMBs, here's your shot, and if you don't have somebody to figure out that graphic, maybe there's a simpler version, Brian, to introduce on that graphic, just to say, look, just figure out these 4 things in this sequence, and then let AI be your coach along the way. What do you
Yeah, I
think?
love that. I've certainly have done my share of coding with the help of AI. I use Claude, and I use some automation software to say things like, hey, I'm trying to do this step. What should I pass to the next step? And it tells me,
Yes.
So, and then I say, well, how do I code that up? And then I'll say things like, well, should I use this type of node or that type of node? And it tells me. It's like having a private tutor, my AI, and it's just ChatGPT or Anthropic or whatever. I think Claude has become my go-to, and I saw some when I was doing research for the news segment, I saw an article that there are a lot of coding platforms that have AI built into them, and there are AI native coding platforms that are called IDEs, and these IDEs that coders use to do the actual coding. There's one called Cursor, and coders are moving away from Cursor because they're finding that the Gemini and Claude models are better at coding. And these are large language models that are also good at plumbing, electricity, plumbing, architectural diagrams, diagnosing medical diseases. These are the same models, and they're also now really good at coding. It's kind of crazy to think about having an expert in your pocket like that.
And we used to have to go to the library.
Now you have it all, and you just
Now
ask
you
the
have
question.
it all right there, the whole world.
Yeah, and I think this is really important because, do we need to go to the library anymore? Do we need to go to classes anymore? Or do you just need to have, your own AI army or bots and a lot of curiosity, and a willingness to learn?
I think that's what Orchestrator was mentioning, right? That, hey, it's all about continuous learning because, whole new, not a whole new field, but yeah, kind of a whole new field. All right, where do I begin? I think if most people would stay curious as we advocate, right? You'd simply just, spend the time on it, invest the time on learning what you need to learn to master it. That's simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am a huge fan of learning just enough, especially when it comes to coding. Just enough to get the job done.
Well, I think it's fascinating to have the idea that salespeople now can code their own microsites. I don't know if you've seen some of these interfaces, but you just ask it a question and it spits out a landing page. I can go build a landing page about Craig Nelson, Orchestrator, by taking his LinkedIn profile and going to one of these coding tools and saying, spit out an HTML page for this. And then I can publish it, and it'll be a microsite about him that took me 1 sentence to write. It's kind of nuts to think about the coding power in these LLMs. So I definitely encourage listeners and viewers to explore the power of the LLM and to think about how to leverage the LLMs and these platform models like Grok and Claude and Anthropic and OpenAI by being curious and seeing what you can do. You'd be surprised, and perhaps you've boxed yourself in for too long inside your little cocoon box of your job. Maybe you can explore other perspectives, and that's really, really key. And that's part of what we want to talk about here is putting it into action. I want to encourage you to do that. I want you to think about, how would we diagnose, where to start? If you need help with that, you can get the AI Lead book. There's a diagnostic in there. You can also think about the speed layer. If you need a copy of that, we can send it over. And then more importantly, think about the outcomes you're trying to drive, and don't discount the technical team in that. A lot of decision making is happening in the tech team or at the tech layer inside of big organizations. From a smaller organization perspective, you can do a lot. If you don't have coding, if you don't have a coding team, you can do a lot with it with LLMs, where you don't even have to ask, you just have to be willing to do it on your own. So team, what thoughts do you have about putting this into action, putting AI into action and getting started and being curious and learning how to do this? Any stories you want to tell about action in action?
Well, I could throw out one. It's this is another one about murky user expectations, right? AI will not come in and magically fix things, and that road to adoption doesn't begin with a really cool AI idea. It actually begins with the integrations. It begins by people asking, how is this process broken currently? And what's the decision point where we need to insert some artificial intelligence? And if your integration is already messed up, like we had this system where we had to go to an LMS manually, run a report, take that report, manually put it into a spreadsheet, and then that information needed to be exported into a Tableau dashboard. And we managed to get it refreshed every week because it was a lot of manual labor. When we added AI into this, it made one part of that, the part where you're analyzing the spreadsheet and getting it formatted for Tableau, that part was definitely streamlined quite a bit. And later on, when through a reduction in force, the person who was doing all of this work had to go, I had to come in there and pick up the slack. And I realized that we had not built the integrations that actually made this easier. We wound up spending more time. And the promise of the technology was that, yes, if I go directly to the chatbot and I paste in this information and I ask the right questions, I can give these managers the reports that they need right away. But ultimately, not fixing the integration problems, not having it go directly from the learning management system to maybe Salesforce, where it's going to be right in front of their faces. The architecture is what helps the adoption, not how brilliant your AI design is.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that point because I think, people have a massive investment in SaaS and other systems right now today. One client I'm working with still on premise. They're not going to get off those systems. So you're going to have to find a way of drawing directly out of them, syncing with them, and then ultimately through generating, feed them. So I appreciate that point of integrator you're making there, because ultimately, it's going to be a transition period. Now think about that. You're going to be running, SaaS and as was mentioned earlier here, the internet version of now SaaS, AI as a service. So think about that. They're going to be doubling down now. They're going to be paying for both systems. They're not going to like doing that very long. And people don't want redundant data either. So you're going to have to choose when you're going to make that move. Brian, I wanted to leave three final thoughts around this, and two of the three came from the Forrester Summit this last week. One is, position it not as replacing, of course. This is going to make you better, right? This makes human better. How do they make it better? Second point is you're having AI do the repetitive tasks you don't want to do anyway. For example, with integration, if this goes and discovers things out on the internet for me, why doesn't it just directly update the CRM so I don't have to go there? So that's a repetitive task. So let's say that you knock out about 5 of those a week, and then by the end of the month, you've got 5 hours worth of savings. And then the final thing is, and I don't think this is a buzzword that's going to go away, agentic AI. And that's once you do figure out some of these AI use cases, chain them together and then have them run without anybody triggering them. In other words, it wakes up on a Monday morning and says, all right, Craig, you're going to be meeting with these 5 people. Go research those 5 people and update, Teams or Slack or email or whatever back to the integration point. So the agentic is going to be really fun to watch. But to do all the things, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating on many different levels to think about all of these automations that could happen to make our lives easier, and also serve our clients better, to help them make decisions, to help them be successful, to help them navigate these murky waters. There's a lot of ways that we can help others with AI, not just ourselves. And I think the promise of AI as a tool or an apparatus of many moving parts that can be, pointed at a specific problem and allow us humans to be creative and to have the oversight of it and ask the questions to get to the detail. I think that's really important as we move forward. We have to get into the details. We cannot just wave our magic wand, and say, hey, cure this disease that hasn't been cured forever. AI, just go do that. There's still the need for architecting, planning, prioritizing, resources, human in the loop, coding to some degree of some sort of software or APIs and integrations. All of these things are still needed. But what's helpful is the horsepower, the thinking power, the brain power of the AI system, the ability for it to handle these really complex challenges. If we lean into that, we can solve so many of the world's problems and also our own workplace challenges by just leaning in and being curious. That's what I think that's really key here. One of the things that I did in the past week was I had an interview. It was actually on a radio show, and on the radio show, the host was talking about all the bad things about AI, like all the privacy concerns, all the deep fakes that are out there, AI used for bad, and example after example after example. And I said in that interview, and I'll say it now, that AI didn't do those things. That was the humans directing the AI to do those things. Like, the AI didn't wake up in the morning and decide to go do those things. Like, it doesn't do that. It does what the humans tell it to do. And just like anything, money especially, you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. So if we're obsessed with the negative side of AI and all the bad things it can do, we have to realize that it's the people doing that with the help of AI. And what if there was that much more on the good side happening to cancel out that bad stuff? What would that even look like? So yeah, AI can do some bad things, but it's really the people behind it that are doing these bad things. It's the human element on the bad side and the good side, right? I think being passive and letting things happen, to me, you can wait and see, and in the S curve of change, that's always going to happen. You're going to choose to be a laggard and let things happen. But in the conversation we're having, we're talking about taking a AI leadership role, and that's really my thoughts. What comes out today is, I'm choosing to take a leadership role and explore this so that harnessing it for the good. Scalar, what are some of your thoughts?
I'd say they're around. Don't be afraid to use it. Stay curious. Start small. Pilot it. Embrace it. And I don't know, real simple. I mean, again, it seems like the past couple episodes we've had, we've always kind of come back to the human element in this whole thing, and that's really, I think, what we're talking about. It's it's the human element of it. That's what's going to drive it and sustain it and govern it. So stay curious.
Any aha moments from you, integrator? Thoughts?
Humans have a really, really low tolerance for additional elements to a workflow. I mean, it was baffling to me a year ago when I realized that copying and pasting elements out of a text file was too hard for some people to do. They just wouldn't even try it as a result of that. So I feel like if you're building these systems for humans, it really does need to just dangle the insightful information right in front of their face. User experience design needs to be way more important when you're talking about a rollout than it currently is.
Yeah, great point. Awesome. Well, as we're wrapping up today, I encourage you to stay engaged, to stay curious, to keep exploring, identify the friction points. That's a good spot for AI. I hate doing X. Well, explore AI's impact on that X and see if it can help you. Think about it from people first perspective, humanize AI's efforts, human-led, empathetic organizations, and using AI for good. Be on that side. Be on the team AI for good, and see where it can help. Get curious, even if it's outside of your job description, and be the bridge between solving those problems and putting it into action. Even if that means you can't wait for everybody else to do it for you, even if that means you're asking AI how to create an API connection, or even if it means asking AI to help you with coding something. Getting to the point where you're a little bit more technical instead of just waiting for somebody to be technical for you can really go a long way in figuring out how AI can not only make your life easier, but help your customers be successful. So that's our call to action. Find that friction, be people first, be the bridge. And also, you can always attend and rewatch any of the webinars that we have at digitalcommand.co/webinars. I encourage you to check that out. So on behalf of Orchestrator, Scaler, and Integrator, thanks so much for joining the AI Lead Show this week. It's every Friday at noon. Congratulations to Jen Marie for, was it 3 million points? I don't know where you can use them, but you got them. I hope you have a great weekend with those. And we'll see you all next week on the AI Lead Show. Take care.
Great weekend.